Welcome to All About Albemarle, the segment where we talk about the things that matter to the people who live, work, and play in the city of Albemarle. I'm David Fath, the Communications Director for the city, and joining me today is Kevin Robinson, the city's Planning and Development Director. Kevin, good to have you back on.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the things we like to do on this segment is really explain the operations of local government, and not all local government is the same. There are some key differences between a city and a county, especially when it comes to the goals of land use. Can you explain some of the key differences between a city's land use and a county's land use?
Sure. And I just want to be clear, David. I'm not saying that a county is better or a city is better. There's just key differences between the lifestyle in each one of those kind of communities. The biggest difference really would be when it comes to land use would be the city's meant to have homes and businesses in a more concentrated area. It's known as density. And the benefit of density is efficiency. That's the reason that we do it. It's not having things closer together for no reason. There's some very good reasons for doing that, and it's a reason why throughout history cities have kind of developed the way that they have. That efficiency means lower cost for services: sewer, water, roads, electric, police, fire, all those things you would associate with services you would have at your house.
Let's explain a little bit why density sort of creates that efficiency for us.
Sure. So it's a more efficient use of infrastructure such as streets and water, the services I mentioned before. Let me throw out an analogy here just to make it a little bit easier to understand. We're dealing with space. So imagine there's two movie theater screens that are playing at the same place, playing the same movie. You've got about 24 people watching, and both of them, they're largely empty. They can hold 100 or more. Well, it takes a certain amount of money to run that movie theater and to keep both of those screens up and running. And the owner, he may not be able to run both the screens with 24 people sitting in each theater. He's probably got two options. He can either raise ticket prices, or he can try to get everybody to watch on one screen. He doesn't want to crowd it, certainly, but he knows there's room for it, and he wants to bring some of the people over to the other screen. That's how he's going to make sure it pays for itself. A city's really no different than that. I mean, we're dealing with space. We're dealing with people that want to live here and services that we need to provide. We know there's divine costs to each foot of street and sewer and water lines that are out there. After they go in, they need to be maintained. That costs a certain amount. May not be every year, but we know that over a certain time frame, they're going to need to be replaced and need to be maintained. So every foot costs a certain amount. We know that it gets harder and harder to maintain those the further out that we go from facilities, and police and fire services are no different. The further out you go from a police station, from a fire station, the more expensive it gets to service that area. Mm-hmm. The longer your service calls, the more firefighters you're probably going to need to have on there. So there's costs to that as well. The question of density really revolves around how much service do we want and how do we want to pay for it. If we're to maintain the standards of the city services, then we need to make sure that we can pay for it. And that means we either need to try to maintain certain levels of density, or we agree to raise taxes and utility rates. Most of us don't want to do the second one there. We don't want to see our taxes go up.
No, we don't.
So we're all in agreement on that. So a certain level of density to remain efficient and smart with our tax dollars is important. That's really why we try to do it. We want to sustain what we've got in the city right now. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, let's sort of talk about also the fact that because there are different purposes for a city versus a county, it's going to impact the way that they view growth, for example. Can you sort of explain what that is, how they view growth differently?
Sure. There's really not a fundamental difference between one person who lives in the county and who lives in the city. We got many county residents around Albemarle who have Albemarle mailing addresses. They consider themselves part of the community, and they are. They come here to work, shop, pray with us. They're part of the community. Biggest difference is where they choose to live and what services they want at their home. I'll go back to the movie theater analogy. A resident in one movie theater, they may want to pay less for their ticket. They might want to have some room to spread their legs out a little bit more. Those can be good things. Mm-hmm. But there are some trade-offs with that. That theater owner is probably going to want to have a smaller screen. I would equate the smaller screen to smaller levels of service. You're not going to see sidewalks typically on an area where you've got 4 or 5 acres of land per lot. there's not a lot of people out there, not a lot of people walking. They probably don't need them a lot. Most often they're going to be on septic and well. They'll service those themselves, pay for those themselves. It's really hard to provide those services, sewer and water, to those sites just because of how spread out they are. So those are some of the primary differences. It may take longer for a service call. I'm not sure about service times. I know the sheriff here is they're very good. But it could probably take a little bit longer for somebody who's out in the country a little bit to get a service call. So that's the great thing about the region that we live in, is that, we have both urban areas and rural areas that are still relatively close by, and everybody has a choice in how they want to live and what's important to them. One of the biggest problems that cities and counties have really is that both of them try to get that couple dozen people per theater. We try to blur the line between what's, out in the county, what's more rural and what's more urban. Requiring large lots everywhere that are spread out while also trying to provide those same levels of service, it stretches us thin. It causes funding issues for local government.
If cities are to try to do that, right?
If the cities were to try to do that, yeah, exactly.
Right. It can work for counties because,
absolutely,
like we said, there's different purposes.
Sure, absolutely. County can provide some of those services, but they probably can't provide all of them. They would be stretched thin as well if they tried to do it. It can also cause traffic. Causes rapid loss of farmland, loss of open space, many other issues. It's really what we want to try to avoid here in Albemarle as we grow.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of pause the conversation for the end of part one of this discussion. We definitely want to come back because there's a lot more to the story about describing growth. And what we'll be talking about next is the fact that, as you just mentioned, Albemarle is growing. We were stagnant for a long time. That is changing. We're going to talk about why controlled, managed growth can be a good thing for the community. Lots to discuss on that coming up. Kevin, I appreciate your time. That's all the time we have this week for All About Albemarle. For Kevin Robinson, I'm David Fath. Thanks for listening.